Hello, I'm Susan Craighead with the League of Women Voters of Naperville. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We have a representative form of government and we elect those representatives. And we trust them to get the work done. But I don't know that we always understand exactly how that work gets done. Tonight, we'll be talking about what our legislators do and how they do it, how they educate themselves to know how to vote, what influences their vote, how bills move through the chambers, and more. Our moderator tonight is Mimi Cowan, a League member and former Speaker of the Will County Board. She will be speaking with Senator Laura Ellman of the 21st District and Representative Janet Yang Rohr of District 41. Mimi?
Thanks so much, Susan. Welcome to our legislators and all of our audience members here this evening. This is a great session. Thank you to all of the League members who put this together for us this evening. And thank you to our legislators and their staff for being available here tonight to join us for such a, I think, interesting topic. Of course, I'm biased, being a League of Women Voters nerd, I suppose you could say. So I think this is really an important topic. These things tend to be a little bit more complex than a lot of people probably understand, but we are thankful to our legislators for being here to explain things to us tonight. So we have two of our state legislators here, Senator Laura Ellman and Representative Yang Rohr. So they work in Springfield and they do a great job for us. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves a little bit. State Senator Laura Ellman was first elected in 2018 and serves the 21st District. And Senator Ellman, can you rattle off for us the list of cities that are represented in your state Senate district right now?
Sure. Thank you, Mimi. And thank you, Susan. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Ellman. And the 21st District is comprised, if you look at it on a map, it kind of looks like a barbell with two big sections. And those are Naperville and part of Glen Ellen and part of Lombard. And then there's some Lisle, there's some Bolingbrook, there's a little Downers Grove, and there's some Warrenville, and even a little bit of Wheaton is part of District 21.
That's great. And we also have with us Representative Yang Rohr. And the first state legislative lesson is that each state Senate district has two representatives within it. So half of Senator Ellman's district is Representative Yang Rohr's district. So Representative Yang Rohr, which half of that district is yours? Can you explain that to folks for us here tonight?
Yep, I am the western half of Senator Ellman's district, and because it's half of it, I have far fewer municipalities to rattle off. I'm mainly Naperville, and then I have a bit of Warrenville at the top and a little bit of Bolingbrook at the bottom.
Great, and you were first elected in 2020, correct?
Yep. So this is my second term, and so just finished up my third legislative session in Springfield.
Wonderful. And what committees do you serve on right now?
So the committees that I serve on now versus my first term are a little bit different. There's a little bit of overlap, but right now it's I'm on almost every single education related committee that's available in the House. The only one I'm not on is the higher ed committee, but I do bring, actually it turned out I brought a lot of bills in front of them. And so I'm on K through 12 curriculum, K through 12 policy, K through 12 appropriations and higher ed appropriations. I'm also the vice chair of the pensions and personnel. I'm on healthcare accessibility. I'm also on the small business tech and innovation committee. So quite a few, but a lot of overlap in the topics.
And now this is kind of getting into our first question, and I want to hear about Senator Ellman's committee assignments as well. But going back to your bio as well in your introduction, are your education related committee assignments, is that because you also served as an elected official on the District 203 school board? So was there some is that sort of why you were picked for those committee assignments, because you have a lot of that education policy experience?
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure how the Senate picks committees, but on the House side, it's like a combination of supply and demand, I'd say. So part of it is representatives, the members get to request a list of committees, and then you'll either get them or not, or be put on others, depending on where they need people. For me, the way I requested committees, and I actually got everything that I requested. A big part of it is kind of looking at the district priorities and what constituents care about the most. And without a doubt, in the 41st district, they care about education, which just happened to overlap with my experience in the school board. So there's a lot of kind of knowledge exchange going on there. And then I picked pensions and personnel. I mean, it's important to the district, but that's also kind of my background in investing, finance. And then, healthcare and a small business, also very important to our district. So I was lucky to get everything that I wanted this session.
Oh, that's great. Okay. And Senator Ellman, same question for you. What committees are you on, and how did that kind of all come to be?
Yeah, so our selection process is probably very similar, Representative Yang-Rohr. And I always felt like it was a little bit like choosing electives in high school. We are given a list, and you say, along with the schedule, and you've got to pick those that don't actually conflict. So if two committees are slotted for the same time, you can only pick one. And I didn't get all of the committees I had asked for, but I'm really excited about the committees that I'm on. And I'm on 6. I chair the Environment and Conservation Committee. And like Representative Yang-Rohr, the environment and conservation is very important to our district. And I'm thrilled to chair that committee. I'm also vice chair of financial institutions. I was chair of financial institutions the last session, and I'm still on that committee and vice chair. And that committee has got banking, finance, and I'm looking at cryptocurrency and what we can do to try to regulate that for not only district consumers, but Illinois consumers and investors. And then I'm also on transportation and appropriations and veterans affairs and agriculture. So I'm really excited about all of those. I feel like, not only can I get a well-rounded, the portfolio is so diverse, I get to see a lot of different things that are affecting Illinoisans and the district from a wide range of topics.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And I'm wondering if, when you make those committee requests, if it ties into what you're planning as your legislative agenda for this is a question for both of you, because that committee process plays such a big role in how bills are being created. Are you thinking about, these are the bills I'd really like to bring forward, so I want to have a voice in those committees? Or are you kind of picking the committees first? Or is there a balance there? Senator Ellman, does that play any role?
It's a little bit of a mix. I think when I'm, given the sheet and check the boxes that you want, it's the topics that I see kind of big things happening on the horizon, and that plays a role. And, I don't necessarily have specific bills that, that I'm going to champion when I'm choosing, but now that I am in those roles, I certainly do have some bills that I want to move along in those committees.
Yeah, and I think it.
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
they really do play into each other, because you're picking your committee because your district cares about it, and so you're probably introducing legislation because your district cares about it, and so there's a lot of overlap there. As it turned out, we in my office, we introduced probably 2 or 3 dozen bills this last year, and when we were looking back, every single one that actually passed both chambers and got signed, every single one was related to students or teachers or our schools or our higher ed. And so it really matched up with my committee assignments this year. And it not really intentional, but that just sometimes it's hard to predict how bills will go. And those just happen to be the ones that were successful this year.
Well, I think that you raise an interesting point, and maybe this is a little hard to quantify, but how would you talk to our audience members here about what are the factors that increase the likelihood that a bill will get out of committee, that will have some success? And I think it's also probably important to note that sometimes that can take multiple years or multiple sessions, and that just because it doesn't happen on the first go doesn't mean that it's a dead issue, right? But do you want to talk about that a little bit and what you see as the things that really kind of give something steam?
Yeah, I'd say at least for the time that I've been in there are definitely things that make it easier or harder. The simpler it is, if it's like just dealing with a subject matter or like changing one thing, that is a lot easier to explain to your colleagues on why they should vote for it. When you get to these like not even these omnibus bills, like these where there are tons of topics included in there, but even like 2 or 3 things, by that time it makes it harder to explain everything in a succinct manner. And then there are some that are just very much kind of trying to keep things moving, keep business going, like very local. They just affect your municipality. That's like a little bit easier to get going. It might be more interesting to talk about like what's hard to do. The hard stuff
Sure,
is,
go ahead. That's
yeah.
maybe the opposite is easier to, yeah.
Yeah, the hard stuff is, we had a bill that it's going to take years. I'm guessing it's one of those bills that just takes a lot of negotiations because it affects a lot of parties. This is, I'm thinking about the DuPage River bill, where it started with, in our backyard, in our district, we had some issues crop up about recreational access to the DuPage River, and so introduced some legislation trying to preserve that access, make sure that we've had access for generations. Let's make sure for generations to come we still have it. But once we introduced the bill, like we did get a lot of opposition, got opposition from like the Farm Bureau, and so when you have a bill that affects the whole state like that, that's where you'll get a lot of feedback, and it's going to probably take a few years of negotiating.
I think that's a great example. I will freely admit that I was one of the people that during the pandemic, I did some inner tubing down the DuPage River, and that was when that issue cropped up. And learning at the time, I was also a Forest Preserve commissioner, and learning from the Forest Preserve how complex that issue actually was really eye-opening. So yeah, to think about the complexities there, I think is kind of a fascinating overlay. Senator Ellman, do you want to add anything to those observations about what makes something easier or harder to get out of committee?
Well, I kind of dropped out. My internet is a little bit spotty. I apologize. But yeah, having opposition come out, and I had a bill that sailed through the House, and actually it sailed through Senate committee, no problems at all. And the House had a sister bill that passed the House first, sailed through their committee, sailed through their chamber. And then once it got to the floor of the Senate, opposition came out of the woodwork. This was my radon bill. And that really, really slowed things down. We had people that had not submitted any kind of opposition, didn't mention any problems with the bill. And then I had 2 or 3 different groups come out in opposition, and that really slowed things down. A lot of it is because the fellow members were a little bit surprised. You know, they're getting calls from this interest group and this person, and you know, beforehand, heretofore, it had been, you know, no problems at all. So so even if it is fairly simple, like that bill was, you know, it can also run into some speed bumps. Eventually it did pass. So it was victorious, but yeah, that was a surprising slowdown for that bill.
Well, let's talk for a minute about sort of like the other side of that, of when you're the person that wants to that has to cast a vote, whether that's in committee or on the floor. I think there's probably some different scenarios there. When you're in committee, that's, I'm sure, the time when you're really slowly deliberating and thinking deeply and carefully about things. Not that you don't when it's on the full floor vote, but I would imagine things move a little bit quicker by the time things get to the floor. I'm wondering if you can talk about that difference a little bit, how you evaluate things differently when you're in committee versus kind of the whole chamber vote, and how you make decisions differently in those contexts.
Yeah. And I'm gonna back up a little bit and give a little bit of process, because people might not be really familiar with the flow of how things work. So you know, I'm just a bill. It starts with an idea, and then language gets drafted. And that can really happen anywhere. But there is actually staff in Springfield, the LRB, the Legislative Bureau.
Research Bureau.
Research Bureau, thank you. And they'll draft language, assign a bill number to it. And this happens at least on the Senate, and I think probably similar process on the House side. And then once it gets filed by a sponsor, the person who files it is the chief sponsor of the bill. Then it kind of can start moving. And the first thing that happens is that it will go through a bill review. There will be a group of usually more senior or leadership senators will review it, and it will make its way to our assignments committee. And that's where it's assigned to one of our standing committees. Then once it's assigned, the committee chair will decide to call it, or they'll schedule when it will be heard in committee. And then once it gets heard in committee and it passes, then it will move on to the Senate floor for a vote. And that's kind of how the process works. There's a lot of things that happen in between, and even a lot that people on this call and organizations where they get involved along the way. So as a member of a committee, like I'm on transportation committee, and I hope you can't hear my dogs who are going crazy. So when a bill is heard in committee, I might have already met with advocates and opponents who have approached me about the merits or the faults of the bill, and they would have provided me some education and possibly, you know, brought up some questions that I'd go and research myself, and maybe even go and ask some trusted advisors on, you know. So so that run up to the committee hearing is a time when committee members are approached by those advocates or those opponents to try to educate us and ultimately influence our vote on the committee. Janet, did you want to kind of talk about that process there on your side?
Yeah, and I'll answer. There are a few questions that are popping up in the chat. I can answer those since they're related. Who are the members of LRB? LRB, they're basically like an army of lawyers who are, luckily lawyers because they have to write what will hopefully become a law. And then, do witness slips have an impact? We can answer. They definitely do. I think they definitely do for both me, and I'll speak on behalf of Senator Ellman. I will say though, what makes the most impact for me at least is what constituents are saying. A lot of times we get really bombarded by email campaigns. You can see that they're very coordinated campaigns, which is fine. But when they're all coming from like places that are nowhere near us, that it just doesn't have as much of an effect. I care really about what people in the 41st district are thinking and what they are saying about a bill. But otherwise, the thing I'd add about how to make decisions, I'd say for a bill sponsor, one of their main jobs is to get the votes necessary to get something passed through committee and then through the House. We have double the members of the Senate, and so one of the ways that we manage all the bills that could potentially come through is our speaker requires all of us to if we want to bring a bill to the floor, we have to show that we have at least 60 votes for those bills. And so we do. So I spend a lot of time talking with my colleagues, making sure that I have those votes. It is considered kind of a little bit embarrassing to put a bill up on the board and to not get the votes. But then I also spend a lot of time talking with committee members, before it gets to the floor to make sure that I have their votes too. And so in terms of like trying to decide whether or not to vote or not vote, my colleagues are doing the same to me, like coming to me, talking to me, especially, for those committees and telling me about their bills. So that helps too. Just kind of listening to why they're doing something or what their intention is with the bill.
Yeah, and this is one thing I've talked about in other forums is sort of the purpose of witness slips and needing to kind of clarify that with folks, and versus like what's the best way to communicate constituent feelings about bills to legislators, and that the initial purpose of witness slips when they were created was really for larger groups in Springfield before the invent of the internet, to officially create a log so that legislators could go and look up where big groups stood on bills, right? And now that the internet exists, yes, individual citizens can come and log witness slips. And I know, there have been times in the past where even in the news, there have been people who have said, oh, well, legislators totally ignored the 5,000 citizens who put in witness slips. But that's not exactly the intention of what witness slips are meant to be. And that, like, as you just said, a constituent's email is the best way to kind of connect with your legislator. But if you want to talk a little bit more about parsing the difference between, if there's a bill on educating voters, and the Susan Craighead, president of League of Women Voters of Naperville, puts in a witness slip, what that means versus a random citizen who you don't know puts in a witness slip on the same bill. What those kind of inputs might mean to you.
Yeah, there's absolutely a difference. And then when you go through and, we do read the witness slips and who the people are, if we, when we recognize names, where they're coming from, who they represent, that definitely has an impact. One thing I will say that, to help people who want to get engaged with the legislative process a little more, one of the problems I think with the witness slips is that it happens, maybe right before a committee vote, we read the witness slips into the record, or you might look at witness slip numbers and counts like right when you're on the House floor. But the problem is, by the time if you're looking at it at that point, the problem is you can't change anything. You can't change that legislation. Versus if you see an issue, if you have a problem with legislation, the thing is, the answer that you'll usually get from me or Senator Ellman is not necessarily like yes or no. I'm going to vote yes or no. It's more like, well, tell me what you don't like, and let's see what we can change. Let me go talk with the bill sponsor. Let me see what they're trying to do, because a lot of times it's not going to be yes or no. It's going to be like, what can we change to help you live with this?
Right, and I want to echo Representative Yingru's comments. If there is something coming from a constituent, whether it's email, phone, handwritten letter, typed up letter, or a meeting. I love in-person meetings with constituents too, to talk about it, well before, really at any time before a vote, but the earlier the better to talk about what those comments are, and what the objections or your support really is, what's important to you.
Senator Ellman, I was wondering if you could address another thing about witness slips. I've noticed that sometimes, there's the groups that say, I'm putting in a witness slip that is in support of this bill, or I'm putting in a witness slip that's opposed to this bill. Those things are clear. There's a third category where groups can say, I'm neutral on this bill, which I've always kind of thought like, well, what's the point in taking your time to say I'm neutral on this bill? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. And it's a little bit of inside baseball, but there are groups that have a lot of credibility in Springfield. Like I'm the chair of the Environment Committee, and the Illinois Environmental Council is a very, trustworthy source of information. And if they are in support of a bill, that says something. If they're in opposition for a bill, that says something. And a lot of legislators take those to heart. Now, if they come out and they say they're neutral, that also says something, but it's a little bit more subtle. It's something that, where they're saying, it's really signaling that they're not in, really strong opposition to something, but then again, they're not going to push for it. And for those, the IEC in particular, and there are other groups too, they'll report to their members and to their followers, what's their report card, so they'll rate all of the legislators on how many bills that they supported or failed to support on their report card. And that kind of is a signal that says, yeah, this one is, it might be environment related, but it's not going to be on a report card. And that can tell some members, some senators and representatives something about, their stance on the topic.
So I think that's a really good example of how witness slips are really kind of a different tool used by organizations in a different way than how an individual constituent would, for instance, send an email and say I'm opposed or in support of this bill, or want you to vote for or against something, like in an email or a phone call or a letter. That witness slip is being used sort of differently.
That's right. It is a little bit different, and there's Representative Yang mentioned it kind of alluded to it too. If we get a lot of form letters, especially that are coming from outside of the district, what that really tells me is that some group has really done a good job of mobilizing people, and it might not be clear on who that group is. The same is true oftentimes for witness slips. If we see, a lot of witness slips, pretty much, I think they're time stamped, but sometimes, that will just be a sign that there is some group out there that's really mobilizing people on it. And so it's kind of a proxy for that group who can also put in a witness slip.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's an interesting question too, and I'll direct this to Representative Yang Rohr about kind of timing, and I think this was in the chat too. Timing for when is the best time, not just for witness slips, but for when constituents, when organizations like the League reach out to their legislators. And Representative, I would assume it's kind of dependent on, is this a brand new idea? Is this something that's been in the works? Can you talk a little bit about like when you like to hear from folks about an idea or a bill or their opinions on things? What you mentioned, like at a certain point it's sort of too late, or a certain point it's like not yes or no, it's what we do to make this work. But can you talk about the timing there a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest that the earlier the better, because when you do approach someone early, if you're hearing about some legislation that might be going through, or some you might see something in the news, the earlier the better, because if you have an issue with what's being introduced, and you let me know about it, that's where I can go to the bill sponsor or go to whatever groups are working on it and kind of raise those issues, raise those questions, like what are you seeing here? What did people are experts in the field are telling me it's going to do this. Did you intend for that to happen? And so that in my mind is kind of the ideal circumstance, because the person introducing the bill, they're doing it for good. They have a reason for it. They have a good reason, and they have their priorities too. And so it's not like usually that constructive to just say no, bad, right? It's constructive to change things. But at the same time, I will say there's a question about how many witness slips make a difference. Part of it depends, but I've definitely been in committee meetings where for certain topics, like we worked on one with like vitamin K, vitamin D deficiency testing. We worked with a group, and they really mobilized their people, and they got like 100 witness slips in one day, and it really made a difference. And the committee chair, he's like, "Oh, you did a good job, Rep, getting your people." And I had to give it all to it was all Janice Geider. She did it, but so it really does. It really can make a difference, especially with those committee chairs.
Interesting, because okay, well, I would hope the quality and maybe not the quantity, because it's like, oh, what's the difference between 99 and 101? That, like, where's the tipping point? But I can also see how if suddenly there's an influx, that people might go, oh, okay, well, maybe we better take this concern seriously. Could also make a difference of some sort, so that can help.
So I want to kind of interject on here too. That bill in particular, that one came right from the district, and I want to reiterate to everybody, one of the great joys of serving is to bring ideas that originate in the district and bring them to committee, bring them to the floor, and ultimately, like that one with A1C testing and vitamin D testing, to make it law and make people's lives better. So I know, and Janet has sponsored more bills than I have that have originated in right here within the district. And I think it's something that is a strength of our team, obviously. So if
Well,
you've got any ideas, bring them on.
bring them on. Do you think that the bringing them from the district is one of the things? This kind of goes back to sort of one of our earlier topics that makes it more likely that you're able to get traction with these bills and get them out of your chambers and get the legislation passed. Do you feel that gives it a little more oomph?
Yeah, I think so, because you've got a more compelling story to tell. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I agree with Senator Alman. It's kind of that story. Like in the end, you got to convince your colleagues to vote with you and to help you to move a bill out when you can tell them, you know, why this is going to make a difference in someone's life. And you usually can if it comes from a constituent because they recognize something, that just makes it so much easier to get the support that you need.
So let's turn from that like individual constituent impact to talking about external influences, the influence of lobbyists, the influence of the executive branch. Those are kind of different issues in themselves. How often do you see legislation that seems to have arisen from the executive branch, from the governor's office?
They definitely have their priorities, and they've passed. You know, the Governor Pritzker and his office have passed some pretty big bills. They need a legislator to carry their bills for them, right? And so I'm thinking about the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. That was a really big one. We've had some big EV related ones. They had, you know, one of the things the governor is responsible for is introducing or proposing a budget. So we have a ton of interaction on that, just negotiating those line items sometimes. And then, you know, beyond the governor, there are the constitutional officers. They have their priorities as well. You know, from what I've seen, what I've been told, those constitutional officers, they use that prerogative like kind of very differently from person to person. So, for example, our Illinois treasurer, he is. You see legislation from him a lot, you know, and him working with colleagues. And he's done some really great things around like savings accounts, like the ABLE 529 account, the you know, making sure that workers have retirement savings accounts. So you know, there's a lot of influence and working together on those areas too.
I just got a notification that Laura Ellman left the room, so I'm not sure if she lost her connection. Oh yes, she said she's trying to reconnect. So the show is all yours, Representative Yang Roar. You're front and center for a few minutes. Yeah,
Hi, everybody.
Oh, she's back. She's back. Okay,
I
that's
made
good.
it.
That's good. And what about what, you know, I think lobbyists tend to be you know, a lot of people see it as sort of a dirty word, like, oh, the strength of lobbyists. But I think there's probably pros as well as cons there. There may be some cons, but lobbyists often know their area and can help you learn about. There's just so many subject areas that you're responsible for, and lobbyists can be subject matter experts for you, right? I would imagine they're helpful in some areas, right? Can you talk about that relationship with lobbyists a little bit? Laura, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, you know, I have mentioned the Illinois Environmental Council, and technically they're lobbyists, but they lobby for the environment. You know, but a lot of the information that I learn about particular topics, like the navigable waters bill, and you know, being able to float and paddle on those bills, the people who are associated with IEC actually educated me a lot. When I was chair of financial institutions, and learning a little bit about the Community Reinvestment Act, the CRA, and applying it to credit unions, I learned a lot from people who worked in that space. And some of them were indeed lobbyists. They did have that subject matter expertise. And, you know, they are one of the voices that can offer some valuable information.
Yeah,
Representative, yeah, go ahead. Do you want to add to that?
I'd say one of the things that where my mind really did a 180 was like my thoughts on lobbyists. You know, that they like you said, they don't have the most positive connotations when you think about them. But you know, I think the reality is in Springfield, because there are so many topics, so many things that you're expected to vote on and ultimately, like, you know, make decisions on. They are a lot of times experts in their fields in like very, very specialized areas. Um, so in that sense, they are helpful. And you know, usually I think most legislators, they understand, you know, who pays their bills. And so even if I'm talking with you know, the manufacturers association, I understand kind of like what their motivations are, and I can turn around and ask like other people, like, what's the other side of that story? So it's
Sure.
helpful to like fill in, to talk with them, to fill in the different gaps of your knowledge.
Sure. And I guess, you know, I think it's also important to point out there's different types of lobbyists, right? There's like you said, Illinois Manufacturers Association. It's a group that represents a large body of similarly minded folks that lobbying for a similar kind of things. There's a lobbyist who would work for a single organization, an in-house lobbyist representing one organization. And then there's a lobbyist who might represent a variety of different organizations, and who you might see one day representing one organization and another day representing another organization. So you have a lot of different orientation and access to a lot of different types of lobbying relationships, I think. And those kind of lobbying relationships, they're part of your landscape of educating yourself about a bill or an issue. What would you say is sort of your first go-to when you're like, this is a new subject for me, this is a new topic? What's your first go-to with trying to educate yourself on a new bill idea, a new topic for you?
So if a bill exists, it's usually helpful to read the bill directly, which, you know, I know sounds obvious, but I think a lot of people don't actually read the bills. So that's one way. We're very fortunate on the House side. We have a lot of support staff, research analysts who part of their job is to also look at the bills and talk with you know, the different groups involved, and they also do an analysis for us, like kind of a summary, and they try to keep it pretty neutral in terms of like showing, trying to describe, like, you know, who are the people affected and what do they think and what are some of pros and cons. So that's pretty helpful too. And the reality is when you're voting on hundreds of bills, thousands of votes, when you consider all the committee votes and all the amendments, you know, those kind of those summaries are very important. And then, you know, when we get a lot of times, what my office and I spend our time on is if someone, you know, emails, a constituent emails about a specific bill and we don't know about it, you can go straight to the bill sponsor as well. I think that's part of my job, to make sure that, you know, we're keeping those lines of communications open and going straight to the horse's mouth.
Senator Ellman, same question for you.
Yeah, and same thing on the Senate side. We have got staff that do those analyses, And staff that have been, there are some, we've got a lot of young staff and they're wonderful. And we've got some that have been around for a while. So I'll go to them and ask them questions. And I'll also, in addition to talking to the sponsor, maybe some senators who are a little bit more senior and, who, because as you mentioned, bills don't necessarily pass the first time through. Sometimes there's a little bit of history on different iterations of trying to get a bill passed. So you can also talk to fellow members about that as well. And then, of course, there's Google. There was a bill on water reuse, and I didn't know really anything about it, and Googled it and saw that it was actually part of the Illinois State Water Plan, which led me to read that Illinois State Water Plan. And it's got a lot of great ideas that I'm actually going to try to enact very much of that this year. So, we all learn in different ways, and, at whatever opportunity it avails itself.
Oh,
Well,
I'll add to
Sorry.
that. I think Senator Ellman made a good point. Like, going to your colleagues is very important. I mean, not only the bill sponsor, but like our colleagues all bring their life experiences with them and their expertise. And so I know who to go to if it's like deals with criminal justice, right? Or if it deals with healthcare, doctors. And then, we also spend a lot of our time in the district kind of making those connections too, to understand, how we have kind of our teachers that we call that are on speed dial, like, how is this going to affect you in the classroom? Or, when some other legislation comes up, we can call, the fire chief or the police chief or our superintendents. So there are a lot of other people like that I think we tap as well.
That's great. I think that's a really good, a broad question and some broad answers to cap that part of the conversation. I do want to turn to, we have a couple questions in the chat, and I want to invite all of our listeners, if you have other questions, please drop them in the chat for this last few minutes. So I'm going to read a question here. It's a two-parter with some parts within it. So going to read the whole thing, and Representative Yang-Roar, I'll have you take a stab at this first and let Senator Ellman add on if she has more to say. Given the partisan majorities in both houses, how does that impact the dynamics of what actually does and doesn't get passed? Are there clear factions within the majority party, or does it vary depending on the subject of the legislation? Where is the balance of power? How much time is spent negotiating and gaining consensus within the majority party versus reaching across the aisle and trying to persuade the other party to agree to support a specific piece of legislation? I know that's multifaceted, so but I think you get the gist of the question if you want to take a stab at that.
Yeah, I love that question. It's because I think from an outsider looking in, it looks like, oh, I mean, in the House we have 118 members, 78 Democrats, and it looks like it's practically 2 Dems for every Republican, and so people think like we're just running the show. But let me say that there's this joke I heard recently. Someone said, I didn't want to be a part of any organized group, so I joined the Democratic Party. And I got to say that kind of tracks. let me say, because like within the Democratic Party, like within the House Democrats, the 78 of us are not a monolith in any any way, and we spend a lot of time in caucus, just literally hours in caucus, talking through all these or many issues. And so there are absolutely, to Bill's question, there are definitely different groups. There are different caucuses. So I belong to the Women's Caucus, for example. I belong to the Asian American Caucus. I also kind of dip my toe into the Green Caucus. And so there's also, the caucuses I don't belong to but exist, are oh, there's the Black Caucus, the Latino Caucus, the Downstate Caucus. So everyone kind of has their interests and things that they want to champion, and belonging to those caucuses does help, get votes. And so, especially when I need to make sure that I have the votes necessary for something to pass, I will go to like the Black Caucus or a Black Caucus leader to talk about it, to make sure that I have that group's support. And so, it's important to try to get those votes, and at the same time, because it's important to, I think the 41st district, getting Republican support is also very important. And we asked early, we talked about earlier, how do you what makes a bill easy or hard to pass, or how do you do your research? Well, one of the shorthands is a bill goes up on the board and you can see, kind of some information. One of the things you can see is who are the sponsors of it. And I work pretty hard to try to make sure that there are Republican sponsors, so that when people look up at the board and try to decide how they're going to vote, that they see like, okay, this is okay with, these people. So I think this will be okay for me to vote on.
That sounds like a good, also a good answer to, once you're on the floor for those big votes, there's so many votes happening so quickly, you can't always dig into every issue. So oftentimes you're looking for signs like that. Who are those co-sponsors? So you need to, when you're building your coalitions on your bills, give signs like that. Look, bipartisan support. It's okay to get on board with this bill. Senator Ellman, anything to add in response to that question?
I apologize. I missed the question. I thought I saw it in the chat, though, given the supermajority.
Yeah. How much time do you spend negotiating and gaining consensus within the majority party versus reaching across the aisle? What's the balance there?
Yeah, and it really depends on the bill. One of the nice things about, one of the things about having that supermajority is that, it's actually not very nice, but factions do split off, and trying to gain those different caucuses gets really important when it's a controversial or contentious bill. So that's, I'll do that sometimes, but oftentimes it's a bill that's got bipartisan support, and that's really the exception, because when you look at roll calls and bills, they're usually, very bipartisan as far as the vote.
Thank you for that. So it looks like, I think we've got answers to all the questions. I want to invite you both to make any closing statements, anything we didn't cover that you really wanted to touch on, Senator Ellman.
Sure, thanks. And thank you for everybody's patience as I come in and out of the internet. I want to try to reiterate, I think this has been a great panel, a great discussion to tell you a little bit about what happens in Springfield. But what I really want people to come away with is that we are here for you. And, if you've got a question about how a certain bill is, where a certain bill is in the process, or if you'd like to try to influence where a certain bill is in the process, come to us. That's what we're here for. And, our doors are always open. And, I've been serving, this is my 5th year, and I still continue to learn. So any approach that I'll learn something when you come and ask some questions. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Representative Yang Roar.
Yeah, and I'll add, one of the things about passing a bill is there are 2 chambers, House and Senate, and for a bill to pass, it has to go, things I originate have to also pass through the Senate. And it sure does help to have a good partner on the Senate side, and it has been it has made my life, and I think our constituents' life, so much easier, so much better, and more productive having Senator Ellman on the other side, someone that I can trust handing off my bills to, which kind of become your little babies because you want to make sure that they grow up into law. And so it's been very, very helpful having Senator Ellman there, because I know a lot of other reps, it doesn't necessarily, that relationship doesn't always work out that way. And then, I'll just echo a lot of what Senator Ellman said. We're here to serve the district and make sure like the issues that you all are seeing are addressed. Sometimes that's through legislation. Sometimes that's maybe connecting to the federal congressional level or to a state agency. And you don't have to come to us with like fully formed ideas of what a law you want. That's part of our job, to work with you, to work with staff or our interns to figure out, like, to dig a little bit deeper. And so I think we both have tons of events always going on. Please feel free to come to those, and as part of that, you can hear what other people are doing. You can hear about some of the legislation, some of the activities we're doing, to just give you an idea of the possibilities, because the possibilities are so wide.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's a great comment to end on. And I think with that, I will turn it back over to our president, Susan, for closing comments, and to thank our legislators and to thank our audience this evening.
Yeah, a big thank you, not only to Senator Ellman and Representative Yang Rohr, but also to Mimi Cowan, who was stuck in traffic and is moderating this program from her car in a parking lot, which is why she has gone a little bit into the shadows as the program went on. We really appreciate it. We also appreciate Donna, who was prepared to step in case Mimi lost her connection. So it's been a lot of teamwork tonight. Thank you to our audience for sticking around and being so attentive. If you enjoyed this event and appreciate the community and civic work of the League of Women Voters of Naperville, consider joining us. Go to the join page of our website, lwvnaperville.org. We hold ideas forums most Wednesdays, second Wednesdays of the month. Upcoming programs will include presentations from the Naperville Environment and Sustainability Task Force, and we hope information about ranked choice voting. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.